working day. We will talk about the new legislative initiative to ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and I invite Vitaliy Kupriy, MP from the Petro Poroshenko Bloc, Oleksandra Matviychuk, coordinator of the Euromaidan-SOS Civic Initiative, and Tetiana Mazur, who is executive director at Amnesty International Ukraine. Also, Hanna Hopko will come here, a MP from Samopomich. We can start, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you for paying your attention to this press conference. Today, of course, there's a day of mourning for people who died as a result of actions of terrorist organizations that call themselves Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. And to tell you frankly, the volunteer organizations who work with this range of problems, these days are numerous. For instance, when people call you and say that a volunteer group has vanished in the zone of the conflict, when you talk to people who left captivity about the torture that they sustained, and when you see what's happening in reality when you visit those areas, and the problems that you see in the liberated cities left behind by the war. So I represent Euromaidan-SOS and our work experienced during the Maidan and during the undeclared war waged by Russia against Ukraine shows two things. First, that we should document and detect all the facts of military crimes, war crimes, and it is very important to investigate those facts and to establish people who are guilty of doing this, or people who were not interfering and letting the crimes to happen. And so our press conference is devoted to the important tool of investigating and bringing people to justice, the International Criminal Court. However, Ukraine is still not a member of this court because since 2001, our MPs could not introduce one single sentence into a respective article of our constitution, just one sentence, which is the essence of the reform that was first discussed in a narrow circle of specialists. But now, when war crimes have ceased to be an abstract notion for us, this became also the point of interest of the entire public. There is a lot of myths connected to the International Criminal Court, and the full stop in this creation of myths can be put only by the respective actions. Recently, there was a news that the Russian branch of the International Red Cross has appealed to the International Criminal Court, and the Russian mass media happily reported that the prosecutor has taken this for communication. But this is absurd, as Ukraine is not a party to this court. We very much like to call it the Hague Tribunal, and people cannot understand why the court decided to consider the Euromaidan cases if we are not party to the court. But I want to finish my speech with the appeal to MPs to, as soon as possible, sign this draft which the parliament cannot adopt for 13 years now, and to do everything possible in order to adopt this legislation, which will allow us to become members of the International Criminal Court. For Ukraine, this is not just a fulfillment of a clause of the association agreement. For us, this is probably the only opportunity to bring the Russian Federation to responsibility for the crime that they perpetrated in the Crimea, and also probably our only opportunity to raise the issue of war crimes, of taking hostages, of selecting civil objects as military target, of using the civil population as a life shield that the terrorist organizations of Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics are perpetrating. It is understood that Ukraine as a state does not have an opportunity to conduct an investigation on the territories controlled by terrorists, and we do not have an opportunity to bring to responsibility those accused of Euromaidan crimes, because most of the suspects are on the territory of the neighboring countries. So for us, the International Court is probably the only chance for justice in those cases. And now Tetiana Mazur will speak. She's an executive director of Amnesty International. Well, in reality, Amnesty International not only in Ukraine conducts campaign to ratify the Statute of Rome. We call upon all the governments to sign this statute and to join the International Criminal Court. Our office is no exclusion. We continue to call upon the Ukrainian government to ratify this document. We've been doing this for quite some time, and we saw that prior to all the events on Euromaidan, there was a certain misunderstanding about the role and functions of the International Court. And at the moment, the calls to ratify the Rome Statute are made not only by human rights activists, but still there's a lot of misunderstanding. The International Criminal Court is a constantly acting independent court body which was created by international community to investigate and bring to responsibility people guilty of perpetrating the hardest international crimes and war crimes. Why the court is needed? Although over the last 50 years the international community have set up international and regional systems of protection of human rights, millions of people in the world become victims of international war crimes, and it is said that only some of the people who are guilty of those crimes were brought to responsibility by national courts, but most of them were perpetrating those crimes understanding that they will hardly be brought to responsibility for this. And that's why the International Criminal Court was created. First of all, this is a detaining factor for those who have intention to perpetrate crimes in the human rights sphere. And the Amnesty International has documented a lot of crimes since combat actions started in Ukraine, such as taking hostages, torture, and others. We are sure that if those who are responsible for this knew that they will be punished in court, then we would hear less of such crimes. Then it should stimulate the bodies who which are entrusted with similar obligations to work better. And of course, this will inspire the families of victims to fight for justice, and also it is a significant step in the direction of overcoming unpunished impunity. Of course, the court is a complementary or additional body, which means that it will work only when the national courts do not want to fulfill their obligations. For instance, if the authorities do not want to bring to justice their citizens, especially top officials, or if the criminal court system nationally is ruined as a result of internal conflict, and not a single court in the country can do this. The International Criminal Court can bring people to responsibility if the crime had been perpetrated on the territory of the country where the Statute of Rome was ratified. So the question is why Ukraine is protracting with joining the Rome Statute when the territory of Crimea is occupied by the Russia. We know that this could be instrumental in investigating the crimes perpetrated in Crimea. Also, in some cases, even if the country has not ratified the Statute of Rome, the court can start investigation if the Security Council of UN interferes, if these actions threaten the state of peace. Also, if the country that has not ratified the Statute of Rome but made a statement that they recognize the jurisdiction of the Statute of the International Criminal Court. Such a statement was made by the Ukrainian parliament in the beginning of the year. However, it is a rather dubious step, as the Ukrainian authorities have all the opportunities to ratify it, and the human rights activists really are surprised at why the jurisdiction was recognized for only the period of November 2013 to February 2014, and why for a year the Ukrainian parliament was not able to ratify the statute. The question is whether the Ukrainian authorities try to shift their responsibility for investigating crimes perpetrated at the territory of Ukraine to some international body. And of course, I again emphasize here that the International Criminal Court is a complementary body. If we ratify this Rome Statute and join the International Criminal Court, Ukraine will thus fulfill its international obligations, including the obligations that we have according to the association agreement. This will become a detaining factor to avert war crimes and crimes against humanity in the future. But joining the International Criminal Court will not release Ukraine from its duty to investigate the crimes that were perpetrated during Maidan and during the war in the East. The punishment of those guilty is an inalienable part of a solution of every conflict. Amnesty International in Ukraine has twice addressed every MP, first in December 2013, and then we repeated our appeal in December 2014. We addressed individually every new MP, and most of the replies was, of course, we understand, we agree with you, we are ready to help to ratify the Statute of Rome, but we do hope that at last the MPs will switch from statements to specific actions and will soon introduce necessary amendment to the Constitution of Ukraine. They will ratify the Statute of Rome, and this will mean that there's no place in Ukraine to such crimes as war crimes and other crimes in Ukraine. And now MP Vitaliy Kupriy from Petro Poroshenko's Bloc. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First, why I joined the process. I've been in human rights activism for 10 years, and this is my first term in parliament. I've been working in Dnipro-Dzerzhinsk. It is understood that when Maidan events started, I came here at once. I was here from the first to the last day. I was one of the commandants at the Kiev State Administration, and I saw how my friends died and were wounded. I was concussed, and I was watching how these crimes are investigated. When I became a member of parliament, I got the opportunity to directly communicate with representatives of General Prosecutor's Office. It is understood that my colleagues initiated a joint sitting where Arsen Avakov and Vitaliy, Minister for Interior and General Prosecutor, and Valentina Levaychenko, head of the Ukrainian Security Service, were present, and they were asked about the actions, the events on Maidan. So I asked why there was no active cooperation with the International Criminal Court in The Hague. However, having studied the reports, and they have last came here in November last year, I saw that they came here and went away, and they still don't have documents to adopt their decisions. So I have a well-founded doubt, which leads to the conclusion that the General Prosecutor's Office does not want to work. So we have to decide whether we go and ask International Criminal Court for help and entrust them with the investigation, or do we trust our own General Prosecutor's Office? Because the Parliament of Ukraine has decided, in fact, in March last year, that we do not want to investigate those crimes, and I think that we do not provide the necessary amount of documents and testimony to the International Criminal Court for it to arrive at a well-grounded decision. So I know that representatives of public organizations are already addressing the Office of International Criminal Court in The Hague so that they arrive at conclusion. Now you know that there is a tragedy in Volnovakha, which is a mass crime against humanity, and it could fall under the criteria for the International Criminal Court to start investigation. I think that it is necessary to recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. As colleagues said, that there was such an attempt, and the Constitutional Court has ruled that we have to amend Article 55 of the Constitution of Ukraine. It has to be augmented with appended with one sentence that Ukraine can recognize the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court.
It was interesting for me to follow it. We, as the state, we signed an agreement with the EU on association. We took commitment in accordance to Article 8 of the agreement to ratify Rome Statute and to recognize the jurisdiction of this court. But when I started to collect the deputies' signatures, I need 150 signatures. I see some opposition. And what's interesting, from the representatives of the authorities who declare certain positions, even from the representatives of my own political force. I'm the member of the Petro Poroshenko Bloc faction. As of now, I have 112 signatures out of 150 needed. If you are interested, you can leave your contact details. There's an assistant, Mariana, and she can email to you all the materials and the draft law and who of the MPs signed this initiation of the amendments to the Constitution. As of now, these are 56 MPs from Petro Poroshenko Bloc, little less than half of the faction. Samopomich is very active, 23 signatures from them, and they promised more. We have almost the blitzkrieg of the Leshko party. They 18 signatures collected within 15 minutes just in the assembly hall of the parliament. But we have some problems with the People's Front, only 3 signatures, but just people who I know, and I personally convinced them to sign. There's no central decision. There's no decision from Batkivshina, only Andriy Kozhemyakin, and he's the head of the committee where I work, and he supports this initiative. And also 2 groups, Economic Development and Will of People, they are in the process. We understand they are not the members of the coalition. There might be some complications, but the leaders promised that there will be additional signatures. And there are 10 signatures from the Svoboda party, Parasyuk, Bereza, Filatov, Dmitro Yarash did not sign, but he expressed his consent, and he will do that. What is the issue? When we saw that there's an opposition, some people do not want, because of some reasons, to sign, we prepared the official address to leaders of the factions and groups of MPs with the request to consider that at their factions and also to collect the signatures in the centralized way. I'm not an initiator of the draft law. I'm an initiator of collecting signatures. The draft law is submitted by the group of MPs who signed. We all co-authors. There's no one to be like the leading one. I can refuse from my first signature, let my signature be in the middle. But there are some other issues. When I came to the head of the parliamentary committee on justice, to Ruslan Knizevich, my colleague in faction, and I suggested that he should sign it because that's he should be responsible for that. He refused. I believe because of some reason that we mentioned, he said that ratification of this statute is good for Russia because then Russia will submit applications, will collect the proofs of crimes of our servicemen, and we have non-regulated status of volunteers. They could be considered as criminals, and this will be a problem for us. But I would like to remind you that it is impossible if Ukrainian law enforcement bodies investigate the crimes. Only then the International Criminal Court can start the case if we refuse, and we request them to do that, or if we are unable to do that, and I believe that could not be even criticized. When the person who was the representative of Petro Poroshenko in Verkhovna Rada, Ruslan Knyazevich, so refuses, and maybe the public should push and should also understand this position. Myself, maybe I will have an idea why the president at his level and all those who are subordinate do not want to approve the Roman Statute. There's no immunity from the crime against humanity. No one has this immunity if this crime is considered by the International Criminal Court. Maybe that is a desire to have some guarantees because for themselves, for these senior civil servants. If this is the reason, then this is to be put aside. They need to respect the human rights, the constitution of Ukraine, the laws of Ukraine, and what our leader is afraid this will not happen. So I've collected most of the signatures, and I plan to collect the rest in the nearest time, but there's one more obstacle which I do not understand why it appeared. I had an information from the apparatus of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine that collection of signatures on simple papers where there's everything, this could be considered not legitimate. Why? Because in 2010, Speaker Litvin, when Yanukovych has just become the president, he issued the instructions which says that all such actions are to be regulated, and you have to go to the apparatus of the Verkhovna Rada so that they give you certain special letterheads. If the template is not mentioned of this letterhead is not mentioned anywhere, but these templates will make it more complicated to collect signatures so that the MPs cannot introduce amendments to the Constitution. And I would like to mention that in accordance with the Constitution, all the human rights are defined by the laws. The work of the Verkhovna Rada is defined by the law. There's a law of Ukraine on the procedures of the Verkhovna Rada. This law does not talk about such a procedure of submitting the draft law, even if it is the amendments to the Constitution on some special letterheads with some visas of some civil servants of the HR department. I believe that's the violation of the legislative initiative of the MPs, and I sent the application, the notice to the Speaker to initiate amendments to the Constitution to ratify Roman Statute. I'm ready to answer your questions. We have time for one question if you have it. I have a question not on the signatures but more general about this thesis that's making Russia responsible in the International Criminal Court for its actions in the Crimea. We had to ratify the Roman Statute because Ukraine participated in signing it and participated in diplomatic conference where it was adopted. But how are you planning to make Russia responsible? Because Russia is not the member of the International Criminal Court. It does not recognize its jurisdiction, and there are no legal grounds for Russia to be responsible because it's their desire. We know there were many cases against Russia, and they did not show up being the participant of this or that court. First of all, I did not state that Russia could be made criminally responsible. Not any legal person is impossible. The criminal responsibility is personal, and it relates only to physical persons. The responsibility of those persons who were issuing criminal orders and who were executing them, there's no difference of what nationality the person is, where the person is. International Criminal Court, unlike the European Court on Human Rights, it's not just the statistical body. They do investigation, they do interrogation, they have the prosecutor there, and they will, in accordance with international standards, in accordance with the international agreement, they will make responsible not the country, but the person. I would like to add, Crimea is considered to be the territory of Ukraine. Now the situation with human rights is very tense there. We do not see any crimes which fall under the jurisdiction of Crimea, but we do not understand how the situation will develop. And the least that the country can do to protect human rights of Crimean people is to ratify the Rome Statute. If the crimes take place in Crimea, then the International Criminal Court will be able to interfere. Thank you all for your information, and we'll be waiting for an update from MPs on ratification of Rome Statute. Our next briefing will take place in a few